The autumn sun hung low over Devil's Canyon, like a bleeding wound, casting long shadows across the Colorado Territory as Jed Mercer guided his small herd through the treacherous rocky pass. 20 head of longhorns kicked up clouds of rust-colored dust, their lowing echoing off the sandstone walls in the dying light. In his shirt pocket, pressed close to his heart, lay a faded daguerreotype, the only photograph of his father, as a young man standing beside a taller boy whose face bore an unsettling resemblance to someone Jed couldn't quite place. 8 months he'd been trapped in this hell working for Marshal Clay Dawson after that bastard's corrupt land schemes had stripped away everything the Mercer family had built over 2 generations. Every morning brought fresh humiliation, taking orders from the man who'd orchestrated his family's destruction. Every paycheck felt like blood money earned through gritted teeth. But Jed endured it all because he needed to stay close, needed to gather evidence, needed to find a way to bring Clay down for the systematic annihilation of everything his parents had loved. The memories still burned like acid in his gut, standing on the porch of his family's ranch house, watching Clay's men nail the foreclosure notice to the door, while his mother wept inside. The land grab had been legal, technically speaking. Clay had manipulated territorial laws, bought judges, and forged documents with the skill of a practiced confidence man. When Jed's gentle mother died of heartbreak 3 weeks later, and his proud father drank himself to death by Christmas, Clay had mockingly offered him employment as a ranch hand on his own stolen land. A metallic glint caught his eye from a narrow cave, carved into the cliff face, barely visible behind twisted sage and scattered boulders. Something felt wrong. His cattle were snorting nervously, their instincts screaming danger in the desert stillness. The evening wind carried an odd scent, metallic and sharp, that made his horse paw the ground anxiously. Jed dismounted his weathered boots, crunching on loose shale as he approached the dark opening. He struck a match with trembling fingers and lit his kerosene lantern yellow flame, casting wild shadows on rough stone as he stepped cautiously inside the cave's mouth. What he found nearly stopped his heart cold. A young Pawnee woman lay crumpled against the far wall, like a broken bird, her intricately beaded buckskin dress torn and darkened with blood that had dried to brown stains. Long raven hair was matted with dust, and crimson crude bandages around her left calf soaked through with fresh seepage. When lantern light reached her face, obsidian eyes fluttered open, blazing with pain, yet fierce with unbroken spirit that reminded him of a wounded eagle. "Easy there, miss," Jed whispered, kneeling beside her and setting the lantern down carefully. "I ain't gonna cause you harm." She tried desperately to push away from him, breathing in ragged gasps that echoed off the cave walls. Words in Pawnee spilled from her cracked lips, then halting English, Are you not with the badge men? The ones who came with the sunrise and brought death?" "Name's Jed Mercer, and I don't wear no badge," he replied, examining her wound by flickering light. The bullet had torn clean through her calf muscle missing bone, but leaving a ragged hole that had bled heavily. She was deathly pale from blood loss, her skin cold and clammy. "What do they call you?" "Night Eagle." She managed, studying his weathered face with eyes that held both wariness and desperate hope. Finding only genuine concern in his expression, she allowed herself to sag back against the cool stone. I am scout for my people." As Jed tore long strips from his cotton shirt to make fresh bandages, Night Eagle began to speak, her voice growing steadier despite the obvious agony. Her band had been peaceful scouts, carefully mapping their ancestral territories before crucial treaty negotiations with territorial officials. They'd carried official documents from the governor himself, clearly stating their legal right to travel these disputed lands without interference. Marshals came when morning mist still clung to the grass. She whispered, wincing sharply as he cleaned her wound with water from his canteen. Their leader had eyes like winter ice, spoke of cattle rustlers and dangerous raiders threatening innocent settlers. Lies, all lies. When my uncle showed the papers proving our peaceful mission, The marshal with the silver badge laughed like a coyote and tore them into pieces. Then he raised his hand and gave the order to fire on unarmed men. From a small beaded leather pouch with shaking fingers, she withdrew something that turned Jed's blood to ice water. A tarnished silver marshal's badge, the territorial eagle spread across its surface, with wings that seemed to gleam accusingly in the flickering lantern light. I tore this from his coat during the fighting. She continued, her voice hardening with remembered fury. After they gunned down my brothers and cousins like rabid wolves, 15 brave warriors and scouts rode out 3 days ago to map the old hunting trails. Only I escaped their slaughter. Jed's hands shook violently as he read the engraved name beneath the eagle, C. Dawson, U.S. Marshal, Territory of Colorado. Clay Dawson, his employer. The man who had systematically destroyed his family through corrupt land deals and forged documents. But as the terrible implications crashed over him like an avalanche, another memory surfaced, unbidden. His father drunk on Christmas Eve years ago, muttering about, "Brother Clayton, my firstborn, lost to the devil's ways after that trouble with the law." His mother quickly hushing the old man, but not before Jed caught fragments. "Cut him off. Change the will. Morally unfit to inherit." The photograph in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. The tall boy standing beside his father in that faded image, the one whose face had always seemed vaguely familiar, yet unplaceable. Could it possibly be? "How many of your people died?" Jed asked hoarsely, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. 14 good men," Night Eagle replied, tears carving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "My father is War Chief Running Wolf. When I fail to return by dawn tomorrow, he will know terrible things have befallen us." Outside the cave, a nightbird's call echoed through the canyon. But Jed's experienced ears caught the rhythmic beat of approaching horses beneath the natural sound. His cattle were shifting restlessly now, their anxious lowing bouncing off the rock walls. Riders were coming, and in this lawless territory, far from civilization, that meant deadly trouble. "Keep silent as the grave," he whispered urgently, reaching for his Colt revolver and quickly dousing the lantern flame. "And pray to whatever spirits you believe in that we live to see another sunrise." The rifle shot exploded through the desert night like a thunderclap, sending Night Eagle's obsidian eyes wide with terror. Jed pressed himself flat against the cave wall, pulling her deeper into the concealing shadows as the thunder of hoofbeats pounded past the entrance like a cavalry charge. "I ain't found hide nor hair of any survivors yet," one gruff voice called out, thick with frustration and exhaustion. "Clay wants every last redskin dead and buried," came the harsh reply. "Can't afford witnesses talking about what really happened at Willow Creek. Keep searching every crack and crevice in these rocks." 2 riders wheeled their mounts in tight circles just outside the cave, their horses snorting and stamping nervously. Bright lantern light swept across the opening like a prison searchlight, and Jed held his breath until his lungs burned, one calloused hand gently covering Night Eagle's mouth to stifle any sound. Her skin was burning with fever now, and he could feel violent tremors shaking her weakened body. "Now what about them fresh cattle tracks over yonder?" the first voice demanded. "Probably just strays wandering off from some ranch," his partner replied dismissively. "Come on, let's check Devil's Ridge before we lose the moonlight completely." The hoofbeats gradually faded into the distance, but Jed remained motionless for long, tense minutes. When he finally dared to relight the lantern, Night Eagle was staring at him with new understanding blazing in her fever-bright eyes. "You know this, Marshal," she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of absolute certainty. "This butcher who murdered my people in cold blood." Jed looked down at Clay's badge, still clenched so tightly in his fist that the metal edges cut into his palm. The silver felt cold as a tombstone against his skin. "Yeah, I know him all right. He's my boss, the man I work for every damn day." And he's the son of a bitch who destroyed my family, just like he destroyed yours. As he fashioned a proper splint using broken wooden spokes from an abandoned wagon wheel, and more torn cloth strips, Night Eagle told him about her father's tireless efforts to maintain peace with the advancing white settlers, the careful negotiations and signed treaties that men like Clay destroyed with their insatiable greed and casual violence. But as Jed worked by lantern light, wrapping her wounded leg with methodical care, more troubling memories surfaced from his childhood. His father had always been secretive about his past, claiming to be an orphan who'd made his own way in the world. But there had been moments, drunken confessions, muttered apologies, references to mistakes that can't be undone, and family secrets better left buried. My father commands 50 seasoned warriors. Night Eagle said, her voice growing stronger as the cool water from his canteen revived her slightly. They are already close. We plan to meet at the Sacred Springs tomorrow at noon, when the survivor from our scouting party reaches them with news of the massacre. She met his eyes with grim determination. They will come seeking answers and blood vengeance. The full weight of her words crashed over Jed like a rock slide. 50 battle-hardened Pawnee warriors led by a grieving father whose children had been slaughtered without cause or provocation. They would ride straight for the nearest white settlement, demanding swift and terrible retribution. And the closest settlement was Clay's heavily fortified ranch, built like a fortress in anticipation of exactly this kind of trouble. Sweet Jesus, Jed breathed, suddenly understanding the scope of what was coming. There's gonna be an all-out war. Night Eagle's smile was as sharp and cold as a winter blade. There is already war, Jed Mercer. Your Marshal Clay declared it when he spilled innocent blood on sacred ground. As if her words had conjured them from the desert itself, the deep primal rhythm of war drums began echoing off the canyon walls, faint at first, but growing steadily stronger with each passing minute. The ancient beat spoke of warriors painted for battle of vengeance, long overdue of the terrible justice that was riding toward them through the darkness. My father keeps his sacred promises. Night Eagle whispered, her eyes reflecting the lantern flame like distant stars. When his children fail to return from their missions, he always comes looking for them. The tense standoff stretched through the long night hours, 6 hours of careful silence, while Clay's search parties combed the canyon and war drums pounded ever closer. Jed had positioned himself behind a natural stone barrier inside the cave, giving him both cover and a clear field of fire at the entrance. Night Eagle lay beside him, her fever breaking intermittently, to allow brief moments of clarity where she could whisper vital warnings or tactical advice. As the first pale rays of dawn light began filtering into the canyon, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, the sound of many horses approached at a thunderous gallop. Not Clay's men this time, but something far more dangerous and magnificent. "Marshal Clay's coming," one of the searchers shouted frantically from somewhere near the canyon mouth. I can see his dust cloud from the south. But Jed was listening intently to a different sound, war drums, much closer now, their rhythm echoing off the towering red cliffs like the heartbeats of approaching doom. "Clay," Jed called out from the cave mouth, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp desert air. "I know you're out there. Time we had ourselves an honest conversation." A moment of dead silence, then Clay's distinctive laughter rang out, harsh and mocking, as a crow's cry. "Well, well, little Jed Mercer finally growing himself a backbone. Come on out, boy, and we'll discuss your unfortunate situation like civilized gentlemen." The word civilized tasted like poison on Jed's tongue after what he'd learned about Clay's true nature and the massacre at Willow Creek. "Go straight to hell, Clay," he shouted back defiantly. "You always were too damn stubborn for your own good." Clay called back, his voice carrying a strange tone of familiarity that made Jed's skin crawl. "Just like your daddy was. Look how well that particular trait served him in the end." The cruel words struck Jed like physical blows. But there was something else, a mocking intimacy in Clay's voice, as if he knew intimate secrets about the Mercer family that Jed himself didn't understand. The way he said, "Your daddy," carried an undertone of personal knowledge that went beyond mere corruption and land theft. "Got something here that might interest you, boy." Clay continued with obvious satisfaction. A piece of official paper fluttered down near the cave entrance, heavy parchment with territorial seals and multiple signatures that caught the morning light. Night Eagle gasped when she recognized the document. "Our peace treaty," she whispered in horror. "The sacred document authorizing our scouting mission. He kept it as a trophy of his butchery. Seems your redskin friends had themselves some mighty fancy papers," Clay announced loudly. "Too bad they turned out to be clever forgeries when my experts examined them. Least that's what my official report to the territorial authorities in Denver will say." The war drum stopped with sudden, ominous finality, leaving an eerie silence hanging over the desert, like the calm before a devastating tornado. Through a narrow crack in the cave wall, Jed could see riders cresting the eastern ridge, Pawnee warriors painted for war, their lances and rifles glinting like deadly stars in the morning sun. At their head rode a tall, imposing figure in an elaborate feathered headdress, his face painted in the red and black patterns of vengeance and righteous fury. War Chief Running Wolf had arrived with his army of retribution. "Sweet Mother of God," one of Clay's men muttered in obvious terror. "How many of them savages are there?" "Enough to cause serious problems," Clay replied grimly, but Jed detected a note of genuine concern creeping into his voice for the first time. "Mount up, boys. We're falling back to the ranch where we've got proper defenses and plenty of ammunition." Jed knew Clay's real strategy: retreat to his fortified stronghold, claim the Pawnee were launching an unprovoked attack on innocent white settlers, and use the inevitable battle to eliminate all witnesses to the original massacre. Any survivors would be written off as casualties of a savage Indian raid, their testimony buried with their bodies, unless someone exposed the truth first. "Night Eagle," Jed whispered urgently. "Can you ride despite your injury?" She tested her splinted leg carefully, her jaw clenched against the pain, but her eyes blazing with determination. "If I must ride to see justice done, I will find a way. Then we're getting out of here right now while there's still chaos to cover our escape." The Pawnee war party was spreading across the ridge like storm clouds, gathering for battle. Their spine-chilling war cries echoing through the canyon with the promise of terrible vengeance. Clay's men were hastily mounting their horses, preparing for a desperate fighting retreat across the desert. In the confusion and swirling dust, 2 people might slip away unnoticed. Jed helped Night Eagle struggle to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they crept toward the cave entrance. The morning sun was blindingly bright after hours of darkness, forcing them to squint and stumble as they adjusted to the glare. That was the crucial moment when Clay spotted them. "There," he roared, pointing directly at the cave mouth with savage triumph blazing in his pale eyes. "Mercer and that surviving squaw don't let them escape alive." 3 of Clay's riders immediately spurred their horses toward the cave at a full gallop, revolvers already drawn and ready for killing. Jed raised his Winchester rifle and fired rapidly, the shots echoing like cannon blasts off the canyon walls. His first bullet took one rider clean out of the saddle, blood spraying as the man tumbled lifeless to the rocky ground, but the other 2 kept coming with guns blazing. "Run!" Jed shouted to Night Eagle, pushing her desperately toward his waiting horse. But she shook her head with fierce determination, clutching Clay's stolen badge in her fist like a talisman. "We go together or not at all. We finish this together, whatever the cost." More shots rang out as Clay's remaining men opened fire, their bullets whining past like angry hornets and chipping stone fragments from the rocks around them. Jed returned fire as fast as he could work the Winchester's lever action. But there were too many targets and too little cover. Then the Pawnee war party crested the ridge with a thunderous battle cry. that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth beneath their feet. 50 mounted warriors streamed down into the valley like an unstoppable avalanche of vengeance, their war paint and weapons creating a terrifying spectacle of primal fury that trapped Clay's men between the cave and the charging Indians. The real battle for blood and honor was about to begin. Clay's ranch sprawled across the valley floor like a medieval fortress prepared for siege warfare, a massive stone main house surrounded by defensive walls, guard towers, and interconnected buildings designed specifically for withstanding prolonged attacks. Jed had helped build some of these fortifications himself during his months of employment, never imagining he'd one day be assaulting them from the outside. The main house was constructed of local red sandstone, its walls 3 feet thick with narrow firing slits instead of windows. Guard towers anchored each corner, connected by walkways that allowed defenders to move between positions without exposing themselves to enemy fire. The entire compound was surrounded by a 12-foot wall, topped with sharpened stakes with only one heavily fortified gate providing access. "How many men does he have inside?" Running Wolf asked, studying the stronghold through a spyglass, while his warriors took positions behind scattered boulders. 30, maybe 40 now. Jed replied, counting rifle barrels glinting from windows and walls. Clay's called in every gun for hire in the territory. Professional killers, most of them. The war chief's weathered face was grim as he assessed their tactical situation. They have superior position and ample supplies. We must cross open ground to reach them, and they will cut us down like wheat before the scythe. It was a killing field, half a mile of flat desert with no cover larger than scattered sagebrush. Clay's sharpshooters would massacre any frontal assault long before attackers could reach the walls. But Jed knew something the others didn't, information that might tip the balance. "There's an old wine cellar beneath the main house," he said, pointing to a spot near the kitchen. "Connected to the pantry by a stone tunnel I helped excavate last spring when Clay was storing illegal whiskey shipments. If I can reach it without being spotted." "You cannot succeed alone." Running Wolf protested. "It would be suicide. I'm the only one who knows the exact layout of those tunnels. And this has become family business now, personal between Clay and me." But even as he spoke, Jed felt the weight of the photograph in his pocket, and those half-remembered fragments of his father's drunken confessions nagged at his mind. There was something more here, some deeper connection he couldn't quite grasp. The desperate charge across the open ground became hell incarnate, worse than anything Jed had experienced in his years of frontier violence. Bullets filled the air like a deadly metal storm as Clay's men fired from every window and rooftop of the ranch buildings spread below. The sound was deafening, rifles cracking like thunder ricochets, whining off rocks, men screaming in pain and rage. Jed's horse screamed and stumbled when a slug tore through its flank, dark blood spraying across his boots. Night Eagle's fever-weakened weight made controlling the panicked animal almost impossible, as more shots cracked around them like a deadly hailstorm. Another bullet burned across his shoulder, tearing cloth and flesh. "Hold on," Jed shouted over the chaos, feeling her burning skin through his torn shirt. Every jarring step sent fresh blood seeping through her bandages, and her grip around his waist was growing dangerously weak with each passing second. Running Wolf's warriors had divided into 3 coordinated attack groups, according to Plan 1, creating a noisy diversion from the north to draw Clay's concentrated fire, while the main force used a dry creek bed for partial concealment during their approach. But they were still facing 200 yards of open ground, with virtually no cover larger than scattered sagebrush and wind-carved rocks. A rifle bullet cracked past Jed's left ear so close he felt the searing heat of its passage and smelled burnt gunpowder. Another shattered a rock inches from Night Eagle's head, showering them with razor-sharp stone fragments that drew blood from half a dozen small cuts. His horse screamed again and went down hard, a spreading red stain blossoming on its chest as it crashed to the rocky ground, throwing them both violently forward. Agony shot through Jed's left shoulder, where he'd landed wrong on the sharp stones, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw Night Eagle lying motionless nearby, fresh blood pooling beneath her wounded leg where the splint had been damaged in the fall. But he managed to drag her semi-conscious form behind a cluster of boulders just as more bullets chewed the earth where they'd fallen, sending up geysers of dirt and stone chips. "Oh, we cannot remain here," Running Wolf said tersely, crouching beside them as lead whined overhead like deadly wasps seeking targets. "They have superior position and unlimited ammunition. They will pick us off one by one if we stay pinned down." Through gaps in their rocky shelter, Jed could see Clay's men repositioning themselves methodically for better angles of fire, moving with the precision of experienced soldiers. Thick black smoke was rising from multiple buildings now. Not just cooking smoke, but the acrid smell of important papers being burned in large quantities. Clay was systematically destroying evidence of his crimes, preparing to claim this had been an unprovoked Indian attack. "He's covering his tracks," Jed said grimly, checking his weapons with hands that shook from pain and adrenaline. "If we don't stop him now, the truth dies with all of us." That's when he noticed his left hand was covered with his own blood. A bullet had torn through his palm during the fall, leaving a jagged wound that made gripping his rifle pure agony. But he forced his damaged fingers to work, counting his remaining ammunition with growing desperation. 4 shots left in the Colt, maybe 6 in the Winchester. Not nearly enough for what was coming. Night Eagle stirred weakly in his arms, her obsidian eyes opening with tremendous effort. "The badge," she whispered through cracked lips that were turning blue from blood loss. Still have the proof." She was right. Clay's badge remained their only physical evidence, linking him directly to the massacre at Willow Creek. But if she died before they could present it to territorial authorities, it would just be another mysterious artifact, found on a battlefield, meaningless without her testimony to give it context. "I'm going inside that compound," Jed announced, struggling to his feet despite the screaming pain in his shoulder and mangled hand. "I know the ranch layout better than anyone here. Know exactly where Clay will make his final stand. You cannot succeed alone against such odds." Running Wolf protested, genuine concern etched in his weathered face. "I'm the only one who can get close without being shot on sight," Jed replied, thinking of the hidden tunnel entrance he'd helped construct during his months of unwilling servitude. "And this has become family business now, something that needs settling between Clay and me personally." But even as he spoke, those troubling childhood memories continued nagging at his consciousness. The way Clay had said, "Your daddy," with such intimate knowledge. The photograph of his father standing beside that unknown older boy. The drunken confessions about a firstborn son who'd gone bad and been cut off from the family inheritance. Before anyone could object further, Jed was moving in a desperate sprint from boulder to boulder as bullets kicked up dust clouds around his boots. 3 Pawnee warriors provided covering fire, then their rifles cracking steadily to keep Clay's men busy while he made his approach. In his coat pocket, something crinkled against his chest, that old letter from his father he'd carried for months, without really reading, too consumed with grief and anger, to care about his dying parents' final rambling words. As he ran, dodging shots and diving for cover, more fragments of childhood memories began surfacing with uncomfortable clarity. The root cellar behind the main house was exactly where he remembered a heavy wooden door set into the sloping ground that connected to the kitchen through a narrow stone tunnel, barely wide enough for one man. He'd helped excavate the passage himself during his first month working for Clay, never imagining he'd one day use it to infiltrate his own workplace like a thief in the night. But as he approached the hidden entrance, keeping low to avoid detection, he realized he wasn't alone. Fresh boot prints in the dust around the door, and voices echoing from within the tunnel. Clay had posted guards at this supposedly secret entrance. Jed pressed himself against the stone wall beside the door, listening intently. Two men inside discussing the battle raging above ground. One voice he recognized, Pete Williams, a ranch hand he'd worked alongside for months. The other was unfamiliar, probably one of Clay's hired guns. "I can't keep this up much longer." Pete was saying, his voice tight with fear. "Clay's lost his damn mind up there. Talking about burning everything down, killing everyone who might talk, even his own men, if they start questioning orders." "I've been thinking the same thing," came the reply. "Maybe it's time to cut our losses and get out of here while we still can." Here was an opportunity Jed hadn't expected. He drew his Colt and slipped through the door, moving silently down the stone steps into the tunnel's darkness. "I don't move," he said quietly, emerging behind them with his gun drawn. Both men froze hands, instinctively reaching for the sky. In the dim light filtering down from above, Jed could see the fear in their eyes and something else. Relief, perhaps, at having the decision taken out of their hands. "Jesus, Jed," Pete whispered, recognizing him despite the blood and dirt. "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jed replied grimly. "But Clay's fixing to get us all killed with his madness. You boys want to live through this day?" They nodded frantically, and Jed could see they meant it. Whatever loyalty they'd once felt toward Clay had been burned away by witnessing his increasing brutality and paranoia. "Then here's what we're going to do." Minutes later, the kitchen door burst open, and Pete stumbled inside, clutching a bloody shoulder and shouting in apparent panic. "Indians breached the north wall," he yelled to the defenders positioned throughout the house. "Sam's dead. They're pouring through like water through a broken dam." Clay's men immediately shifted position to defend against the fictional breach, rushing toward the northern windows and leaving other areas temporarily unguarded. In the confusion of shouting and running footsteps, Jed slipped deeper into the burning house through passages he knew by heart. The main room was complete chaos, thick smoke choking the air. The crash of breaking glass, as Pawnee warriors actually did breach some of the northern defenses. The constant crack of gunfire from multiple directions. But through it all, Jed could hear Clay's voice rising above the tumult, commanding his remaining forces from his fortified position near the back of the house. Following the sound through smoke-filled corridors, dodging falling beams, and breathing through his shirt to filter the acrid air. Jed crept toward Clay's stronghold, a reinforced office with barred windows and a steel door that he'd helped install months earlier. Through a crack in the wall, he could see his target. Clay Dawson stood behind a massive oak desk marshal's badge gleaming on his vest. Despite the smoke and chaos, a rifle held ready in his hands. But it was the man beside him that made Jed's blood freeze in his veins. Sam Rodriguez, the second guard from the tunnel. The man who was supposed to be helping Jed, according to their hastily made agreement, stood at Clay's side, very much alive, and holding Jed's own Winchester rifle like a trophy. "Wondered when you'd finally show yourself, little brother," Clay said without turning around, his voice carrying across the room with calm certainty. The words hit Jed like a sledgehammer to the chest, confirming his worst fears. Brother. The half-remembered Christmas confession, the photograph in his pocket. Clay's intimate knowledge of the Mercer family's deepest pain, it all crystallized into horrible, undeniable understanding. Now that's right. Clay continued, finally turning to face him with a sardonic smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. Now Jed could see it clearly, the family resemblance he'd been blind to for 8 months of working together. The same strong jawline, the same stubborn set of shoulders, even the same cleft chin that their father had possessed. Clayton Mercer, firstborn son and rightful heir to everything old man Mercer built with his blood and sweat. Until Daddy decided I was morally unfit and changed his will to favor his precious second family. The room seemed to spin around Jed as the magnitude of Clay's 20-year revenge plan became crystal clear. The foreclosure on the family ranch, the forged documents, the systematic harassment that had driven their parents to early graves, all of it had been carefully planned and executed by a bitter older brother. He'd never known existed a man who'd spent decades nursing his grievances into something monstrous. You murdered our parents. Jed said, his voice barely audible above the sounds of battle raging through the house. I took back what was mine by right of birth. Clay's composure finally cracked, completely revealing the festering hatred that had driven him for 2 decades. Daddy stole my inheritance, gave away my birthright to his precious, legitimate family. I spent 20 years working my way up through the territorial system, learning how to use the law instead of breaking it all, so I could watch the look in his eyes when he realized who was destroying him. With trembling fingers, Jed pulled the old letter from his coat pocket, the one his dying father had pressed into his hands, with whispered words about family secrets and mistakes that can't be undone. By the flickering light of the burning house, he read the faded words that changed everything he thought he knew about his family. My dear Jed, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you deserve to know the truth about your half-brother Clayton. He was my firstborn born before I met your blessed mother, but he chose a dark path of violence and crime that broke my heart. When he was arrested for armed robbery and murder, I had to choose between saving the family name and standing by a son who'd rejected every value I'd tried to teach him. The judge offered to reduce his sentence if I would formally disown him and change my will to exclude him from any inheritance. God forgive me, I chose the family reputation over my own flesh and blood. The letter fell from Jed's nerveless fingers as the terrible truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. Clay hadn't just been cut off for being morally unfit. He'd been abandoned by their father after committing serious crimes, sacrificed to protect the family's standing in the community. You could still join us, Sam said quietly, gesturing with the stolen rifle. 3 men against the world taking control of this whole territory. There's enough wealth buried in this land for all of us to live like kings. For one terrible, tempting moment, Jed felt the pull of that offer. Here was family blood kin, offering him everything he'd lost. The loneliness of 8 months working for his enemy, the grinding poverty since losing the ranch, the constant humiliation of taking orders from the man who destroyed his life, it could all end right here. Then he thought of Night Eagle lying wounded outside of 14 innocent scouts, gunned down in cold blood of his parents, dying broken and penniless because of this man's twisted need for revenge. The badge in Night Eagle's possession, the peace treaty Clay had torn up and kept as a trophy, the systematic corruption that had infected the entire territorial government. We were never brothers, Jed said, raising his Colt with a hand that no longer trembled. Real brothers don't destroy each other's families for gold and land. Clay's response was to swing his rifle toward Jed with deadly intent, but Jed was ready for the betrayal. His first shot took Clay in the right shoulder, spinning him around and sending the rifle clattering across the wooden floor. Sam dove for cover behind the desk as more shots exploded in the confined space, the sound deafening in the smoke-filled room. Then, Running Wolf and a dozen of his warriors burst through the barricaded door like an avalanche of war paint and righteous fury, their tomahawks and rifles gleaming in the firelight. The office became absolute chaos, gunfire, war cries echoing off the walls, the clash of steel on steel as blades met gun barrels in desperate combat. Through the melee of struggling bodies and choking smoke, Jed saw Clay crawling desperately toward a back exit, leaving a crimson trail on the floor from his wounded shoulder. Without hesitation, Jed pursued, tackling his half-brother as they crashed through the doorway onto a wooden porch overlooking the burning ranch compound. They tumbled down the steps in a vicious tangle of fists and desperation, landing hard on the packed earth below. Clay was wounded, but fighting with the cornered animal strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. He managed to draw a skinning knife from his boot, slashing wildly at Jed's face with a gleaming blade. Jed caught Clay's wrist just in time, forcing the weapon away from his throat as they struggled for control with the fury of mortal enemies. Behind them, the ranch house was fully engulfed in flames. Now the heat, incredible, singeing the hair on Jed's arms and filling his lungs with choking smoke that made every breath agony. A massive burning beam crashed down nearby, sending up a shower of sparks and flames that illuminated Clay's face with hellish light. For just a moment, through the hatred and madness, Jed could see past his half-brother's rage to the broken man underneath a child who'd been cast out and forgotten, who'd spent 20 years nursing his grievances into something monstrous and inhuman. We could have ruled this entire territory together. Clay gasped, blood running from his shoulder wound to pool on the smoking wooden planks. Brothers standing united against the world, taking everything we deserved by right of birth and strength. We were never truly brothers. Jed replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion and profound sorrow. Real brothers don't destroy each other's families for money and revenge. The skinning knife fell from Clay's nerveless fingers as defeat finally claimed him, the blade clattering on the boards between them. They were both breathing hard, covered in blood and ash from the burning buildings around them, their long conflict finally reaching its inevitable conclusion. A shadow fell across them both, and Jed looked up to see Running Wolf standing over them with his tomahawk raised, the war chief's face streaked with war paint and smoke, his dark eyes holding the judgment of ages. The butcher still draws breath. Running Wolf asked in his heavily accented English. He lives, Jed confirmed, struggling painfully to his feet. For trial, for proper judgment before both our peoples. Running Wolf considered this carefully, then slowly lowered his weapon with the dignity of a man who understood that true justice required more than simple vengeance. Let both our peoples see what becomes of those who commit murder while wearing the badge of law. Clay managed a bitter laugh, despite his pain and defeat. Trial. You think any white jury will convict a United States marshal on the word of savages and a family traitor? The war chief's expression didn't change, but something deadly and implacable flickered in his obsidian eyes. We shall discover what passes for justice in your civilization. The fires had consumed most of the ranch buildings by the time the shooting finally stopped, completely sending towering pillars of black smoke into the desert sky that could be seen for 50 miles in every direction. Jed sat heavily on what remained of the porch steps, his wounded shoulder and mangled hand throbbing in rhythm with his exhausted heartbeat, watching Clay's surviving men being rounded up by painted Pawnee warriors who showed them more mercy than they probably deserved. Night Eagle was helped toward them by 2 Pawnee women who'd arrived with reinforcements from the main camp. Her fever had finally broken completely, and though she remained pale and unsteady on her splinted leg, there was renewed strength blazing in her dark eyes, like banked coals ready to flare back to life. You should not be walking yet, Jed said, rising painfully to meet her, despite his own considerable injuries. I needed to witness this ending with my own eyes, she replied, looking around at the smoldering ruins and captured prisoners with grim satisfaction. Needed to know with absolute certainty that it was truly finished. Running Wolf approached them through the drifting smoke and ash, his war paint now streaked with sweat and soot from the battle. In his weathered hands, he carried Clay's badge, the crucial evidence Night Eagle had risked everything to preserve during her desperate escape from the massacre. My daughter tells me this belongs to the butcher, he said solemnly, holding up the tarnished silver star. It will serve as proof when we deliver him to the territorial authorities in Denver for proper trial. You're not going to execute him here and now? Jed asked, genuinely surprised by the merciful decision. Sir, there has been enough killing on this cursed ground. Running Wolf replied with the hard-earned wisdom of age and experience. This man will face judgment from both our peoples in the white man's courts. Let the entire territory witness what befalls those who commit murder while wearing the sacred badge of law enforcement. It was more mercy than Clay had shown to anyone during his reign of corruption and terror. But Jed understood the war chief's strategic thinking. A public trial would expose all of Clay's crimes to official scrutiny, making it impossible for other corrupt officials to cover up the truth or repeat his sins with impunity. 6 months later, Jed stood in the polished witness box of the territorial courthouse in Denver. His scarred left hand, resting on a worn leather Bible as he swore a solemn oath to tell the complete and unvarnished truth about the massacre at Willow Creek. The packed courtroom filled with reporters, territorial officials, curious citizens, and representatives of various Indian tribes fell into absolute silence as he began testifying against his own flesh and blood. Detailing Clay's decades of systematic corruption with methodical precision, the evidence presented over 3 weeks of testimony was overwhelming and utterly damning. Clay's badge recovered by Night Eagle at the cost of her people's blood. Sworn testimony from surviving members of his posse who'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Physical evidence from the massacre site, carefully documented by territorial investigators. The peace treaty Clay had torn up and kept as a macabre trophy. And most devastating of all, Clay's personal journal, discovered in a Denver bank vault containing detailed records of his systematic revenge against the Mercer family and his elaborate illegal land acquisition schemes. When the elderly judge pronounced the death sentence in a voice that echoed through the silent courtroom like the tolling of funeral bells, Clay showed no visible emotion. But as the bailiff prepared to lead him away in chains to await execution, he looked directly at Jed one final time, with pale eyes that held secrets and sorrows no one would ever fully understand. "Blood will always tell in the end, little brother," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. "You'll see what our father's choices cost both his sons." After the trial concluded with Clay's conviction on all charges, Jed joined Night Eagle and Running Wolf outside the courthouse, where autumn leaves danced in the crisp Colorado air, and the first snow of winter dusted the distant mountains. The war chief carried a small wooden box, intricately carved with traditional Pawnee designs that told ancient stories of honor and courage earned through sacrifice. "Among my people," Running Wolf said with ceremonial gravity, "this sacred token is given only to warriors who have proven themselves worthy through blood sacrifice and earned our complete trust." He opened the box to reveal a silver arrowhead, hanging from a leather cord, its surface etched with symbols of alliance and brotherhood that caught the afternoon sunlight. "You are no longer an outsider to us, Jed Mercer. Your courage has made you family." As Jed accepted the arrowhead with hands that trembled with deep emotion, Night Eagle stepped closer, her cheeks coloring slightly with what might have been shyness or something deeper. "There is something more," she said softly. "Among my people, when a woman wishes to court a warrior she respects and admires, she offers him a second token of her intentions." From her own beaded pouch, she withdrew another silver arrowhead, this one carved with different symbols that spoke of love and partnership of 2 lives joining as one. "This choice is mine alone to make, and I make it freely with full knowledge of what it means." Looking into her obsidian eyes, Jed saw not just gratitude or friendship, but something deeper and more precious, something that had grown between them from that first desperate night in the cave, when she trusted him with her very life, nurtured through shared danger and mutual respect, into something that could last a lifetime. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, still awed by the magnitude of what she was offering. "I'm still Clayton's brother by blood. His sins flow in my veins too. Blood is merely what you are born with." Night Eagle replied with quiet conviction that brooked no argument. "Honor is what you choose to become, through your actions. And you have chosen to be a man of honor regardless of what your brother became." Before Jed could form a response to her declaration, a young newspaper reporter approached their small group with stunning news that would change everything once again. Clay's scheduled execution had been postponed indefinitely. The territorial governor had received an unprecedented petition signed by over 200 Pawnee from various bands throughout the region, formally requesting that his sentence be commuted to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Or, why would your people show him such extraordinary mercy? Jed asked Running Wolf, genuinely amazed by this unexpected act of compassion toward their enemy. "Because we learned a profound truth from watching you choose justice over vengeance." The war chief replied simply, his weathered face reflecting decades of wisdom earned through suffering. "Sometimes showing mercy to our enemies requires more strength and courage than seeking their destruction. Let him live with his shame and guilt, trapped in a cage like a wild animal, thinking about his crimes and the lives he destroyed every single day until he draws his final breath. That is a far crueler punishment than a quick death at the end of a rope." As they walked together through the bustling streets of Denver, past merchants hawking their wares and children playing in the dusty thoroughfares, Jed felt the weight of both silver arrowheads against his chest, one representing truth finally revealed, and crimes properly punished, the other representing hope for a future where two different worlds could come together in understanding and love. The past was finally settled after years of pain and uncertainty. Night Eagle was alive, and healing her people had received the justice they deserved. Clay would spend the rest of his natural life in prison, paying for his sins behind bars instead of at the end of a hangman's noose. But most importantly, Jed had discovered something he'd never dared hope for. A family that had chosen him not for his bloodline or his past, but for his character and the choices he'd made when tested by fire. The silver arrowheads chimed softly together as he walked, creating a sound like wind chimes in the desert breeze, a sound like coming home, at last, to a place where he truly belonged.